With tears streaming down her face, my daughter-in-law knelt in front of the entire family and said, "Mom, please, just admit you have a problem. I saw you take the money." My name is Frances, and in that moment, in my own living room, I was being painted as a confused, senile thief. But there was one little detail they had all forgotten. The trial they had so carefully staged was about to have its star witness, the security camera. Tell me, have you ever been underestimated to the point where you had no choice but to show them exactly who they were messing with? The late Friday afternoon sun streamed through my living room window on October 3rd, 2025, casting a golden glow on my collection of porcelain teapots, each one a memory from a life well lived with my late husband, Robert. Sat gleaming on the mantelpiece, but that familiar warmth couldn't dispel the distinct chill that settled in the air whenever Ava, my daughter-in-law, walked through the door. "You don't need to worry, Mom," my son Leo had said back in August when he installed the network of tiny security cameras. "It's just to make sure you're safe." I had laughed it off as a son's needless worry, and the electronic eyes had since faded from my memory, silent and forgotten observers in the corners of my life. The scent of the apple pie I'd baked filled the house, a weekly peace offering I laid at the altar of family harmony. Ava entered, placing a small, generic-scented candle on my coffee table. It smelled of vanilla and something artificial. "Just a little something to brighten the place up, Frances," she said, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. Her gaze, sharp and appraising, swept across the room, lingering for a moment too long on each piece of furniture, each photograph, each testament to the 40 years I had built this home. It always made me feel like a museum piece in my own life. "You know," she began, her voice dripping with the faux sweetness she had perfected, "this room has such wonderful bones. It would feel so much more open and modern if things were rearranged." Before I could form a polite refusal, she moved toward the wingback chair by the fireplace. It was Robert's chair. The worn leather, softened over decades of use, still held the faint shape of him, a comforting ghost I refused to part with. With a determined push that scraped the chair's wooden legs against the floor, she shifted it to the opposite wall, leaving a naked, vulnerable space by the hearth. "See?" she declared, dusting her hands with an air of accomplishment. "So much better. It really breathes now." Leo, ever the reluctant referee in the silent war between us, just offered a weak, placating smile from the doorway. "It does open up the space, honey," he mumbled, his eyes darting anywhere but at mine. I said nothing, my heart clenching into a tight, painful knot, but I knew that as soon as they left, I would move it back. Some boundaries were invisible, but they were sacred. As they prepared to leave, a ritual that always felt more like an escape for them, Ava's eyes landed on the small, old-fashioned safe tucked away in the corner, behind a stack of Robert's history books. It held little of actual monetary value, just old love letters, our marriage certificate, and a few pieces of jewelry that were rich in sentiment. "My goodness, you still have this old thing," she chirped with a light, dismissive laugh that grated on my nerves. "Who even uses a safe these days? It's so quaint." The word hung in the air, a polite little dagger aimed right at the heart of my history, my life with Robert. Leo, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, quickly ushered her out the door, eager to escape the suffocating tension. That night, long after the cloying scent of her vanilla candle had faded, I set about restoring order to my sanctuary. I pushed Robert's chair back to its rightful place, its familiar weight a small, solid comfort in my hands. As I straightened the bookshelf, my fingers brushed against the small crystal figurine of a hummingbird, a gift from my sister years ago. It was out of place, shifted a few inches to the left from where it always sat. It was a small thing, an insignificant detail in the grand scheme of the evening's violations. But as I carefully moved it back, an unsettling feeling, cold and sharp, slithered up my spine. It was the distinct, terrifying feeling that I was no longer alone in my own home, even when I was the only one here. The sickening crack of porcelain against the hardwood floor ripped through the Sunday morning quiet, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, it was no accident. The vase, a swirl of desert blues and sunset reds, had been Robert's gift to me on our 20th anniversary, a treasure from a trip we took to Santa Fe back in 1998. It sat on a small mahogany table near the archway, a silent testament to a love that time could not break, until now. It was Sunday, October 5th, 2025, and I was trying. I was stirring gravy in the kitchen while the scent of roast chicken filled the air, a deliberate attempt to weave the threads of our fraying family back together with the familiar comfort of a shared meal. Ava had insisted on helping with lunch, which mostly involved her leaning against the counter, scrolling through her phone and making passive-aggressive comments about the efficiency of my kitchen. "It's just so cramped in here, Frances," she'd sighed, gesturing vaguely at my neatly arranged pots and pans. "I don't know how you managed to get anything done." I didn't respond, focusing on the rhythmic stir of the wooden spoon against the saucepan. Leo was in the den, the low hum of the Sunday football game a familiar backdrop to our strained domestic scene. The crash came when Ava decided to carry the salad bowl to the dining room table. Instead of taking the direct, clear path through the kitchen, she weaved unnecessarily through the living room. I heard the soft thud of her hip against the mahogany table, a movement too deliberate, too forceful to be clumsy, followed by the vase's terrible final sound. I rushed in from the kitchen to see the shards scattered like fallen, broken petals on the polished wood. Ava stood over the wreckage, her hand flying to her mouth in a gesture of mock horror that never once reached her cold, assessing eyes. "Oh, goodness, I'm so sorry, Frances," she said, her voice a practiced performance of regret. She then let out a theatrical sigh, a sound of put-upon exasperation. But honestly, if there wasn't so much clutter in here, this probably wouldn't have happened. The blame, so deftly shifted, hung in the air between us, as sharp and jagged as the broken pieces on the floor. Leo appeared from the den, his face a mask of concern, but his first move was to put a protective arm around his wife's shoulders. "Mom, it was just an accident," he said, his voice soft and placating, his words directed at me, not her. "We can get you a new one." He glanced around the room, his eyes scanning the furniture, the photographs, the life I had built. He echoed her sentiment, his words a deeper betrayal than the act itself. "Besides, maybe she has a point. We could probably stand to, clear some of this out." That was the blow that truly shattered me. Not the loss of the vase, but the casual dismissal in my son's voice as he sided with her, invalidating my grief, my memories, and my home in a single careless breath. I knelt, my knees protesting against the hard floor, and began to pick up the larger pieces of my broken past. The smooth, cool edges felt sharp against my trembling fingertips. As I gathered the fragments of blue and red, a cold thought took root in my mind, stark and clear against the fog of my hurt. She did it on purpose. Later that evening, after they had left a house that felt both empty and violated, I retrieved a small leather-bound notebook from my desk drawer, the same notebook where I kept my sewing measurements and garden planting schedules. I opened it to a fresh page. My hand was steady as I wrote the date, Sunday, October 5th, and then the words, "Ava broke the Santa Fe vase, intentionally." The war had begun, and I had just documented its first casualty. "Mom, something's happened." Ava's voice crackled over the phone, a frantic, high-pitched sound that made the hairs on my arm stand up. It was Tuesday morning, October 7th, 2025, and I was sitting at my kitchen table, enjoying the quiet stillness of the house with a cup of tea. But her voice, a carefully tuned instrument of alarm, shattered that peace instantly. I felt a jolt of a mother's instinctual fear, my mind immediately flying to my son. Ava, what is it? Is Leo all right? There was a dramatic pause on the other end of the line, a space just long enough to build suspense, punctuated by a shaky, theatrical sob that sounded suspiciously well-rehearsed. "Leo's fine," she whispered, her voice breathy with manufactured distress. It's the money." I was confused. We had never discussed money in such urgent terms. "What money, dear?" Her next words brought back her comment from Friday, the dismissive little laugh as she'd eyed the old safe in the corner of my living room. "The money I left at your house, for the down payment on the new car. I tucked it away in your safe for safekeeping, remember? $2,000, Frances. And it's gone." The accusation, though wrapped in a veneer of panic, was as sharp and clear as the shattering of Robert's vase just days before. I gripped the heavy plastic receiver of my landline, my knuckles turning white. "Ava, that's impossible," I said, my voice firm despite the tremor I felt spreading through my chest. "I haven't opened that safe in years. The combination died with Robert." "Are you sure?" she pressed, her voice taking on a tone of pitying concern that was far more insulting than a direct accusation. "Are you absolutely sure, Frances? Because I put it there myself on Friday afternoon. I saw you were busy getting ready for dinner, and I didn't want to bother you." She let out another heart-wrenching sob, a sound so perfectly timed it could have won an award. "I just don't know what to think. It's just, you've been so forgetful lately. Last week you misplaced your keys for hours, remember? And then there was that unfortunate accident with the vase. I'm just so worried about your health." The poison was so skillfully administered, disguised as love and care. She wasn't calling me a thief. She was calling me senile, incompetent, a woman whose own mind was betraying her, whose memories could no longer be trusted. I was speechless, the words caught in my throat, a knot of outrage and a terrifying flicker of self-doubt warring within me. She took my stunned silence as her cue to deliver the final, devastating blow. I need to talk to Leo," she said, her voice now a low, conspiratorial whisper, as if she were protecting me from myself. "We have to do something to help you." She hung up before I could form a response, leaving her words to echo in the sudden, deafening quiet. I slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle, my hand shaking so violently it rattled against the plastic. The silence of my home rushed back in, but it was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, accusatory. For the first time in my life, a terrifying question, planted by the venomous sweetness of my daughter-in-law's voice, took root in the deepest part of my mind. Could I have? Did I open it and just forget? For 2 full days, I existed in a thick, disorienting fog. I wandered through my own house like a ghost, touching familiar objects, Robert's reading glasses on the nightstand, a chipped teacup, the smooth wood of the dining table, trying to anchor myself to a reality that felt like it was slipping through my fingers. Ava's words replayed in an endless, cruel loop in my mind. "You've been so forgetful lately." My own trusted mind, the one that had managed a household, raised a son, and navigated 70 years of life, had suddenly become a hostile and unfamiliar territory. I found myself performing small, anxious rituals. I would check to make sure the coffee maker was off, walk away, and then return 2 minutes later, a cold knot of uncertainty in my stomach, just to check again. I would stare at my own neat handwriting in the leather-bound notebook, a list of groceries, and a terrifying thought would whisper through my mind. What if I wrote something else and don't remember? The gaslighting was insidious, a slow-acting poison. Had I really misplaced my purse for nearly an hour last month, as Ava had so helpfully, so publicly pointed out at a family dinner? Did I truly forget Leo's birthday until she called with a cheerful, chiding reminder, saving the day? Each memory she had so carefully curated as a sign of my decline now felt like another piece of evidence against me, another crack in the foundation of my own sanity. By Thursday morning, October 9th, I couldn't bear the suffocating silence of my own thoughts any longer. The isolation was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I couldn't talk to Leo. He was already convinced I was the problem. I had one lifeline. I called Eleanor. We met at the Daily Grind, our usual spot, a small coffee shop downtown that always smelled of roasted beans, cinnamon, and the damp wool of autumn coats. The familiar clatter of ceramic mugs and the low hum of conversation from other patrons offered a small pocket of normalcy in my unraveling world. Eleanor, with her sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense gray bob that she'd worn for 20 years, took one look at my face as I slid into the booth and pushed the sugar dispenser to the side. "All right, Frances. Out with it," she said, her voice devoid of pity, but full of the unwavering loyalty of a 40-year friendship. "You look like you've seen a ghost." My own, perhaps, I thought grimly. My voice was barely a whisper at first, the words catching in my throat as I told her everything. I told her about the deliberately broken vase, the frantic phone call, the missing $2,000, and then I confessed the most shameful part, the gnawing, terrifying doubt that maybe, just maybe, Ava was right, that maybe my mind was beginning to fail me, that I had become a liability to myself. Eleanor listened without a single interruption, her gaze fixed on my face, her own coffee growing cold in its mug. When I finally finished, the confession leaving me feeling hollowed out and exposed, she didn't offer comforting platitudes. She snorted, a sharp, indignant sound. "Nonsense," she declared, loud enough for the couple at the next table to glance over. "Absolute nonsense. Frances, you are the most meticulous, organized woman I know. You still balance your checkbook down to the last penny. You've never forgotten my birthday in 4 decades. The idea of you simply misplacing $2,000 is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard." She leaned forward across the table, her voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. "And let's talk about the logic here. Since when does a savvy young woman like Ava leave that much cash in a dusty old safe instead of a bank? It doesn't add up, not for a second." Her reasoning was like a splash of cold, clean water, startling me out of my self-pitying daze. She was right. It was illogical. It was theatrical. It was a setup. As the truth of it began to dawn on me, a glimmer of my old self returning, Eleanor suddenly sat bolt upright, her eyes wide with a sudden, brilliant thought. She snapped her fingers, the sound sharp in the quiet cafe. "Wait a minute," she said, her voice electric. "Wait just one damn minute. Frances, didn't Leo install that fancy security system for you a few months ago? The one you complained was too complicated and made you feel like you were living in a fortress?" The word struck me like a bolt of lightning, cutting through the fog of my confusion with the force of a physical blow. The security system, the cameras, those silent, forgotten, electronic eyes. How could I have possibly forgotten? The security system's control box was exactly where Leo had left it, tucked behind a row of Robert's old history books, coated in a fine layer of dust. Wiping it clean felt like disturbing a tomb. As I plugged it in, I felt a tremor of dread, the feeling of a person about to willingly open Pandora's box, knowing the horrors within could never be put back. Leo's words from that August day echoed in my mind, laced with a bitter irony. "It's just to make sure you're safe, Mom." Safe from what, I now wondered? Strangers, or the enemy I had welcomed into my home? My hands trembled as I dialed his number. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" His voice was casual, oblivious. I forced a quiver into my own. "Leo, I'm sorry to bother you, but I think I heard a noise in the garden, by the back fence. You know how you installed those cameras? How do I look at the footage?" It was a pathetic lie, but it worked. "Oh, sure, Mom, it's easy. Just open the Secure Home app I put on your phone," he said, his tone a familiar, gentle condescension reserved for the technologically inept. He patiently walked me through the process of logging in and accessing the recorded files. Just scroll to the date you want to see. It's all there." I hung up, my heart hammering against my ribs. The app opened to a grid of camera angles: living room, kitchen, front porch. I took a deep, shuddering breath and navigated to the archive. I scrolled back with a trembling thumb, past Wednesday, past Tuesday, past the weekend, until I landed on the date, Friday, October 3rd, 2025. I found the time Ava had been here alone while I was out getting groceries. I pressed play. The silent, grainy footage showed my living room, empty and still. Then the front door opened and Ava walked in. She looked around, her movements furtive, and walked directly to the corner where the safe was hidden. There was no hesitation. She knelt, her fingers flying across the combination dial with a familiarity that made my stomach churn. The heavy door swung open. I watched, breathless, as she reached inside, pulled out a thick white envelope and slipped the wad of cash from it. She didn't just shove it in her purse. She carefully unzipped an inner lining, a hidden compartment, and tucked the money deep inside before zipping it shut. The act was so practiced, so deliberate. It screamed of deception. My breath hitched. The proof was undeniable, a cold, hard, digital fact. But it was what happened next that shattered me. I rewound the footage, watching it again. As Ava clicked the safe door shut, she stood up and glanced around the room, a slow, cold, triumphant smile spreading across her face. It was the smile of someone who believed she had just secured her victory, completely unaware she was being watched. It wasn't a smile of joy or relief. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated triumph. A cold, calculating smirk of conquest that said, "I won. You're just a foolish old woman." It was the smile of someone who not only took what wasn't hers, but reveled in the deceit. In that moment, the grief, the hurt, the sickening self-doubt of the past 2 days evaporated, burned away by a white-hot surge of pure, clarifying rage. The fog was gone. I saw everything with perfect, chilling clarity. I closed the app. I did not cry. I began to plan. The next morning, Friday, October 10th, 2025, the phone rang at precisely 9 a.m. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, my movements calm and measured. I saw Ava's name on the caller ID and let it ring twice before answering, a small act of reclaiming control. "Hello?" I said, my voice even. "Mom, it's me," she began, her voice a practiced symphony of concern. "I was just calling to see how you were. After our conversation, I've been so worried." The performance was flawless, just as it had been so many times before. Only now I could see the strings. "I'm fine, dear," I replied, my voice sweet as honey. "Thank you for caring." After I hung up, I went into my study. The first order of business was to secure my weapon. I sat at Robert's old oak desk, the computer humming quietly as I copied the video file onto a small, discreet USB drive, the progress bar filled with agonizing slowness. Once it was done, I ejected the drive and walked to the bookshelf. I pulled out a heavy photo album, its pages filled with pictures of a smiling Leo as a child. I opened it to a photo of Robert and me on our last anniversary, his arm wrapped around me, both of us laughing into the camera. I carefully taped the small USB drive to the back of the photograph and slid it back into its plastic sleeve. No one would ever look for it there. With the primary evidence secured, curiosity, cold and sharp, got the better of me. I spent the next hour scrolling through weeks of archived footage. It was a painful education in the art of petty theft. I watched Ava, on a visit 2 months prior, slip a pair of my silver earrings into her pocket while I was in the garden. I saw her just last month deftly palm a $20 bill from my purse as she was helping me find my reading glasses. Each small betrayal was a cut, hardening my resolve. This wasn't a one-time mistake born of desperation. This was a habit, a character flaw, a deep-seated contempt for me and everything I owned. My rage now had a purpose. I put the security system aside and turned to Robert's desk, pulling open the bottom drawer where we kept our important financial documents. It was all there, perfectly organized. Bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds. Tucked into an old checkbook, I found what I was looking for, a crisp, cream-colored business card. Gable and Associates, attorneys at law. Mr. Gable had been Robert's trusted lawyer for 30 years. I placed the card on the desk, a silent promise to my late husband that I would not let his legacy be destroyed. The phone rang again late that afternoon. It was Leo. "Mom," he started, his voice heavy with a manufactured gravity. "Ava and I have been talking. She's really worried about you. We all are. She's arranged for a family get-together on Sunday evening, here, so we can all talk, as a family, to help you." The trap had been set. The stage was being prepared for my public humiliation, for the final gentle push into the role of the confused, incompetent old woman. The kindness in my voice was genuine, but its source was no longer love. It was strategy. "Of course, son," I replied, my tone soft and agreeable. "I'll be there." "Mrs. Crawford, could I have a word with you for a moment?" The voice, quiet and gravelly, startled me. I looked up from the rose bush I was pruning, a task that usually brought me a measure of peace, to see Mr. Henderson standing on the edge of his perfectly manicured lawn across the street. In the 5 years since he'd moved in, a widower like me, we'd only ever exchanged polite waves and the occasional nod. He was a man who kept to himself, and his unexpected address sent a small jolt of apprehension through me. I clipped a final errant stem and walked toward him, wiping the dirt from my hands on my gardening apron. It was late Friday afternoon, October 10th, 2025. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the street was quiet. "Of course, Arthur," I said, forcing a calm into my voice that I did not feel. "Is everything all right?" He hesitated, his gaze shifting from me to my house and back again, a clear reluctance in his eyes. "I don't mean to pry, Francis," he began, his voice low, as if sharing a confidence. "It's not my place. But I installed one of those new doorbell cameras last month, for security. I was reviewing the footage from last week. I was looking for a package delivery that went missing, and I saw something, concerning." My heart gave a small, tight squeeze. I kept my expression neutral. "Go on," I prompted, my voice steady. "It was last Friday afternoon," he said, the date hanging in the air between us. "The very day the money disappeared. Your daughter-in-law was out front. A large, dark American sedan pulled up. Not her usual car, a different one. A man got out. Not a pleasant-looking fellow, if you catch my meaning. Burly, with a noticeable scar above his left eye." He paused, as if to let the image sink in. They spoke for a minute. She seemed very agitated. Then he handed her a thick manila envelope, and she went back inside your house. A cold dread washed over me as his description clicked into place. I'd heard whispers around town, stories about a local loan shark named Mickey Gallo who operated in the shadows of our quiet suburb. A man known for his flashy cars and violent temper. The expensive vehicle Ava drove, the one she claimed she got for a steal. The designer clothes that seemed so out of place with their supposed financial struggles. It wasn't Leo's modest salary paying for them. It was borrowed money, dangerous money. Her motive wasn't just simple, ugly greed. It was the frantic, cornered desperation of a person drowning in debt. Seeing the look of dawning horror on my face, Mr. Henderson nodded slowly. "I saved the clip," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure what to make of it, but it didn't feel right." He pulled out his own phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. "I can send it to your phone if you think it would be helpful." He looked at me then, a moment of quiet solidarity passing between two solitary people on a quiet suburban street. "I mind my own business, Francis," he said, meeting my eyes, "but I don't abide bullies." A moment later, my phone chimed with a new message notification, a video file from an unknown number. I now had 2 videos. The story they told was no longer just about family betrayal and greed. It was about desperation, secrets, and something far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. "Mom, you should probably prepare yourself," Leo said over the phone, his voice heavy with a guilt that wasn't entirely his own. The sound was strained, thin, as if he were forcing the words through a constricted throat. "Ava's parents. They're coming over tomorrow night, too." It was late on Saturday afternoon, October 11th, 2025. I was in the kitchen, wiping down a counter that was already spotless. The repetitive, mindless motion, a small anchor in a sea of controlled fury. His words didn't surprise me. The performance was simply expanding its cast. I could almost picture them now. The Sterlings, Ava's parents, whom I had met on only a handful of occasions. I recalled them at the wedding 2 years ago. Her father, a man who spoke about his golf club memberships as if they were major life achievements, and her mother, a woman who had looked at my simple handmade dress with a barely concealed sneer. They were reinforcements brought in to play the part of the concerned, respectable in-laws, their presence designed to lend weight and credibility to Ava's fabricated narrative of my decline. "They just want to be here to support Ava through this," Leo stammered, clearly reciting a line that had been fed to him, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. In the background, I could hear the faint, muffled sound of a television, and for a second, I thought I heard a woman's whisper, Ava, no doubt, coaching him from the sofa. And, well, to help us all figure out the best solution for you. A solution. The word was so clinical, so detached, as if I were a leaking faucet or a pest problem to be dealt with, rather than a mother to be trusted. The stage was being expanded. This wasn't an intervention born of love. It was a carefully orchestrated ambush designed to corner me, to isolate me under the combined weight of their feigned concern and collective judgment. I looked out the kitchen window at the crisp autumn air, at the crimson leaves skittering across the lawn. "That's fine, Leo," I said, my voice unnervingly calm, a placid lake surface hiding the roiling currents beneath. His surprise was audible, a small, sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Really? You're okay with that?" Of course he was surprised. They were expecting hysterics, denial, the frantic protestations of a cornered, confused old woman whose mind was failing her. My quiet compliance was not part of their script. "They're your family too, dear," I said gently, twisting the knife of his own words. "They have a right to be concerned." I let a moment of silence hang between us, a carefully measured pause that I knew would make him deeply uncomfortable. Then I asked the question that had been sitting like a stone in my chest since this whole nightmare began, the one whose answer would determine everything. "Leo," I said, my voice soft but as clear and sharp as glass, "do you truly believe that I stole that money?" The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was a physical thing, a heavy, suffocating blanket filled with his cowardice, his betrayal, his choice. It stretched for 3, 4, 5 agonizing seconds. I could hear his shallow breathing. I could hear the faint, insistent murmur of a woman's voice in the background, almost certainly Ava's, whispering instructions, encouragement. He was a puppet, and I could hear his master pulling the strings. Each second was a hammer blow to the last fragile piece of my heart that had hoped he might, in the end, choose me, his mother, over her lies. Finally, he exhaled, a sound of pure, gutless defeat. "Mom, it's complicated." No, it wasn't. It was the simplest question in the world, and his inability to answer it was the only answer I needed. "I understand, Leo," I said, and the line went dead. After hanging up, I stood motionless in the kitchen's fading light. My gaze fell on a small, faded photograph on the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a sunflower. It was Leo, age 7, grinning a gap-toothed smile, his arm thrown around my neck. The boy in that picture would have defended his mother without a second thought. I didn't know the man who had just been on the phone. With a heavy heart, I walked back to my study. The small black USB drive lay on the desk, a tiny rectangle holding an explosive truth. I picked it up, its plastic casing cool against my skin. Any lingering shred of doubt, any thought of a softer path, any hope for a last-minute reprieve had been burned away completely by my son's silence. I spent the entirety of Saturday, October 11th, 2025, not in a state of anxious dread, but in the quiet, focused calm of a general surveying the battlefield before the final, decisive engagement. The house was still, a silent accomplice to my planning. There was no more fear. My son's silence on the phone had cauterized that wound, leaving behind a hard, unyielding resolve. My first move was purely practical, a test of my primary weapon. I walked to the large smart television in the living room, the polished black screen that would serve as my courtroom. Retrieving the USB drive from its hiding place, I inserted it into the port. My fingers, usually so nimble with a needle and thread, felt clumsy navigating the remote. After a moment, the television's media hub appeared. I selected the file labeled Living Room, October 3rd. The scene of my own home filled the 55-inch screen in sharp detail, and there she was, Ava, her betrayal magnified. I watched her kneel, open the safe, and slide the cash into her purse. Then came the moment that had seared itself into my memory. She looked up, and that cold, triumphant smile spread across her face. The image was crystal clear. The weapon was armed and ready. The rest of the afternoon was spent at Robert's old oak desk, assembling the supporting evidence. It was a small, powerful dossier. I printed my most recent bank statements from the last 6 months, a thick stack of papers that screamed solvency, not desperation. My healthy savings account, my modest but stable 401k, all meticulously documented. I placed these next to the small leather-bound notebook. I flipped through the pages, my own neat script, a damning timeline of her cruelty. October 5th, Ava broke the Santa Fe vase, intentionally. October 7th, Ava called, feigning panic over $2,000. As I slid the final document into the folder, my eyes fell upon the framed wedding photograph of Leo and Ava on the corner of the desk. It was from 2 years ago. They looked so happy, so full of promise. Leo's smile was wide and genuine, his arm wrapped protectively around his new bride. A wave of profound, unexpected sadness washed over me, a grief for the son I thought I knew, and the future I thought he would have. My mission tomorrow wasn't just about exposing a liar, it was about detonating a bomb in the middle of my son's life. The collateral damage would be his heart, his marriage, his belief in the woman he loved. I took a deep breath, pushing the sadness down, containing it in a locked box in my chest. This was a surgery, I told myself, painful but necessary to remove a cancer that was poisoning my family from the inside out. I had to be the one to do it, and I was ready to hold the scalpel. An hour before the family meeting was scheduled to begin, the doorbell chimed. It wasn't Leo or Ava. They were never this punctual. My heart gave a small lurch, a flicker of unplanned-for anxiety. I smoothed the front of my simple black dress and walked to the door. Standing on my porch was Arthur Gable, his silver hair neatly combed, his expression as serious and composed as I remembered from the day we settled Robert's estate. He carried a slim leather briefcase. The business card I had stared at for a day had become a man of flesh and blood. After the profound sadness of yesterday, I had woken this morning, Sunday, October 12th, 2025, with a new resolve. I had made the call. "Mr. Gable," I'd said, my voice steady, "this is Frances Crawford. My late husband, Robert, trusted you implicitly. I find myself in a situation that requires your immediate counsel. It concerns an attempt to defraud me of my property by my family." He hadn't asked questions or expressed surprise. His tone was all business. "I'll be there at 6, was all he said. "Frances," he said now, offering a firm, dry handshake. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." I led him into the living room, the intended stage for tonight's drama. I didn't waste time with pleasantries or small talk. I laid out the story in clipped, factual sentences, the accusations, the gaslighting, the 2 videos I had secured on the USB drive. I opened my laptop on the coffee table and played the clips for him. He watched both, his face an unreadable mask of professionalism. When Ava's triumphant smile filled the screen at the end of the first video, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That was the only reaction he allowed himself. "They will likely ask you to sign a power of attorney," he stated when I was done, his voice a calm anchor in my swirling emotions. "They will frame it as a loving gesture, a way to help you manage your affairs while you're going through this difficult time. You will refuse, politely but firmly. State that your financial matters are private and in order." He then addressed the darker possibility. "If they have consulted a lawyer, which it seems they have, they may threaten to petition the court for a guardianship, claiming you are no longer competent. That is their endgame." He gestured toward the evidence I had compiled, the bank statements, the notebook. "They won't succeed. A petition for guardianship requires substantial proof of incompetence, not just a family's say-so. Your meticulous records and this video evidence paint a picture of a woman who is not only competent, but is being actively and maliciously targeted." He closed his briefcase with a soft, definitive click. The sound seemed to solidify my resolve. "Mrs. Crawford," he said, rising to his feet and looking at me with a glimmer of something beyond professional respect. Admiration. "They think they're hunting a lamb, but they are about to find themselves in a cage with a lioness. You do what you have to do tonight. Present your truth. I will provide the legal backup for whatever comes next." As I walked him to the door, a sense of profound, steely calm settled over me. Just as his car pulled away from the curb, a pair of headlights swept across the front of the house, illuminating the living room window and the empty chairs waiting within. The sound of a car engine cutting off was followed by 2 doors slamming shut in the driveway. They were here. The show was about to begin. My living room had never felt so suffocating, packed with people who bore the title of family, but had come to act as jury for a trial where the verdict was already decided. It was Sunday evening, October 12th, 2025. I sat in Robert's wingback chair, a silent queen in a kingdom under siege, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Across from me, Ava's parents, the Sterlings, sat stiffly on the sofa, their expressions a perfect practice blend of pity and resolve. Leo was in a chair by the window, studiously avoiding my gaze, his body angled towards the dark glass as if he could will himself to disappear into the night beyond. Ava began, her voice soft and trembling, a masterful performance of reluctant grief. "Mom," she started, dabbing a perfectly dry eye with a tissue she had crumpled in her hand for effect. "Thank you for seeing us. We're so worried about you." She let the words hang in the heavy air, allowing them to seep into the room, to paint me as the source of their collective pain. I remained silent, my gaze steady, observing the artist at her work. She took a shaky breath and continued, her voice cracking on cue as she recounted her well-rehearsed list of my supposed failings. It's not just the little things anymore, the misplaced keys, forgetting appointments, but when the money for the car down payment disappeared from the safe, it was $2,000, Mom. She looked around at her parents, her audience, as if seeking strength to deliver the painful truth. At first, I thought I was going crazy, but then I remembered, "You've been so confused lately." She brought up the story of the broken vase, twisting it from an act of aggression into a symptom of my supposed frailty. She just stumbled. It was so sudden. She didn't even seem to realize what she'd done. Her father, a portly man with a self-important air that Robert would have despised, cleared his throat. "Francis," he said, his tone paternalistic and deeply condescending, "we're not here to place blame. We are here to find a solution. We believe with all our hearts that it's time for you to receive some professional support. And perhaps, he added, glancing pointedly at a silent Leo, it would be best to let Leo and Ava take over the burden of managing your assets. A simple guardianship to protect you from yourself. The word guardianship was the signal. The legal threat, now spoken aloud, hung in the room like a poison gas. Ava moved in for the kill. She glided across the room and knelt before me, her expensive dress pooling on the rug at my feet. She took both of my hands in hers, her grip surprisingly strong, her eyes welling with crocodile tears that finally spilled over. "Mom, please," she whispered, her voice a desperate, pleading sob that was utterly convincing. "Just admit you have a problem. Don't you see we're all here to help you? I saw you take the money. It's okay. We can get you help." The direct lie, so bold and so public, was breathtaking in its audacity. Every eye in the room was fixed on me, waiting for my reaction, my confession, my collapse. My son, my own son, finally turned from the window. His face was pale, his eyes begging me to make this easy, to fold, to surrender. "Mom, please," he said, his voice a broken plea. "Explain." "Explain?" I said, my voice a strange island of calm in the churning sea of their expectations. It was not the voice of a confused old woman, but of someone who had been waiting patiently for this exact moment. "Of course, son. I'd be happy to." I rose from Robert's wingback chair, ignoring the collective intake of breath, the surprise that flickered across their faces. They had been expecting tears, a confession, a collapse. They were not prepared for this. I walked deliberately to the large, smart television mounted on the wall, the silent centerpiece of the room. My movements were unhurried, each step a reclamation of the space they had tried to steal from me. The thick rug muffled my footsteps, the only sound in the suddenly still room. I reached behind the television, my fingers finding the USB port with ease, a small modern convenience I was suddenly deeply grateful for. "Fortunately," I said, my voice clear and carrying through the stunned silence as I addressed the room, though my words were aimed directly at my son, "Leo's little safety gift has proven to be quite useful." I glanced at him. His face, which had been pleading just a moment ago, was now utterly bewildered. He installed this system to keep me safe, and in a way he never could have intended, it had. I inserted the USB drive. Using the remote control, my actions were methodical, my hands surprisingly steady. I navigated to the media hub, the soft clicks of the remote the only sound breaking the thick tension. I selected the USB device. A list of files appeared on the 55-inch screen. I clicked on the one I had labeled simply Living Room, October 3rd. The screen flickered to life, displaying the familiar, still image of my own living room. A collective, confused murmur rippled through my small audience. They were watching a picture of the very room they were sitting in. And then I pressed play. The silent film began. The room watched itself on screen, empty and still under the afternoon light. Then the front door in the video opened and Ava's image appeared. I saw her mother, Mrs. Sterling, lean forward on the sofa, a frown of confusion creasing her brow. The video Ava looked around, her movements furtive and quick, before walking with a chilling purpose directly to the corner of the room where the old safe was hidden. I heard a choked gasp from Leo, a small, wounded sound. The room was utterly silent now, the only sound the faint electronic hum of the television. We all watched as she knelt, her fingers flying across the combination dial, with a familiarity that made my stomach churn. The heavy door swung open. On screen, Ava reached in, her hand emerging with the thick white envelope I kept my important papers in. She extracted the wad of cash, her movements swift and sure. The air in the room grew thick, unbreathable. We watched as she slid the money not just into her purse, but into a hidden compartment inside the lining, a practiced, deceitful motion. She zipped it shut and then closed the heavy door of the safe, giving it a final, satisfying click. But I let the video continue playing for the final, damning moment. As the on-screen Ava stood up, she glanced around the room with an air of arrogant victory, a slow, cold, triumphant smile spreading across her face. It was the smile of a predator that had successfully cornered its prey, and it was aimed at all of us. I heard another gasp, this one a sharp, ragged sound from Ava herself. The color had drained completely from her face, leaving it a waxy, pale mask of pure horror. Her perfect, tear-soaked performance had crumbled to dust in a matter of seconds. "But that only answers where the money went," I said, my voice cutting through the thick, horrified silence as I picked up the remote control again. "It doesn't explain why." I clicked on the second video file. The view on the screen changed, now showing the street in front of my house, the image slightly distorted from a wide-angle lens. The recording from Mr. Henderson's doorbell. The dark American sedan pulled up to the curb. The burly, unpleasant-looking man with the scar above his eye got out. The on-screen Ava, looking agitated and scared, exchanged sharp, hushed words with him before he handed her a thick manila envelope. "And here you are, Ava, dear," I said, my voice dangerously soft as the video played out her desperate, secret transaction on that very same Friday afternoon. Receiving money from a well-known loan shark. Perhaps this is the real reason for your little drama. The screen went black. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier and more profound than any I had ever known. I turned, my gaze sweeping over each of their horrified faces before landing squarely on my daughter-in-law, who looked as if she had seen a ghost, her own. "Now, who wants to explain?" The silence in my living room on that evening of Sunday, October 12th, 2025, shattered not with a bang, but with the wet, choked sob of utter humiliation. The sound, ugly and raw, was ripped from Ava's throat. All eyes were on her, this woman who had moments ago been the confident, grieving accuser, now reduced to a pale, trembling ruin on my floor. The digital ghosts of her crime still shimmering on the dark television screen. It was her father, Mr. Sterling, who moved first. He was a man accustomed to being in control, but the videos had stripped him of all authority. He rose from the sofa, his face a mottled patchwork of crimson and white, unable to meet my gaze. We had no idea, Francis," he stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. He tugged at his wife's arm, a woman who looked as if she had been turned to stone, her face a blank mask of shock. "We are so terribly sorry for this intrusion." He practically dragged Mrs. Sterling from the room. They didn't look at their daughter. They didn't look at Leo. They scurried out the front door like thieves caught in the act, the sound of it clicking shut behind them as final as a gavel. Their retreat seemed to snap Ava out of her stupor. "It's a fake!" she shrieked, scrambling to her feet, her voice raw and desperate. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted between me and a shell-shocked Leo. "She edited it. She's a manipulative old woman. She's been trying to turn you against me since day one." She pointed a shaking finger at the blank television screen, then at me. "She's the thief. She probably took the money herself and made this movie to frame me." But her words were hollow, the frantic lies of a cornered animal. No one was listening. No one believed her. The silence from her own husband was her true condemnation. Leo, who had been frozen in his chair like a man struck by lightning, finally seemed to awaken. He rose slowly, his movements stiff, as if he were an old man rising from a long, troubled sleep. He didn't look at me. He looked only at his wife, and the expression on his face was one of such profound, bottomless disgust, it was almost unrecognizable. The weak, placating man I knew was gone, replaced by a stranger with hard, cold eyes that held the wreckage of his shattered trust. "Was it all a lie, Ava?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous, each word dropping like a stone into the suffocating silence. "The money, the vase, the The way you told me she was losing her mind? All of it." Her frantic denials died in her throat, replaced by a fresh wave of panicked sobs as she realized there was no escape. His question had confirmed her guilt more effectively than the videos ever could. I knew this was my moment. This was not a time for anger, but for judgment. I walked toward the center of the room, my posture straight, my voice steady. "I will not call the police," I announced. The statement hung in the air, a shocking act of mercy. Ava's head snapped up, a flicker of desperate hope in her tear-filled eyes. I met her gaze, and whatever hope she had, I extinguished it with my next words. "I will not do that because I refuse to put my son through the public shame of having his wife arrested for theft and fraud." I let that sink in before delivering my terms. "But there is one condition. You will get out of his life. You will get out of this house. You will pack a bag with only what you came with, and you will leave. Right now." Leo stood there, his fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tight. For a heart-stopping second, I saw his old weakness flicker in his eyes, the instinct to smooth things over, to avoid the final, brutal confrontation. But then, he looked at me. His mother, the woman he had silently allowed to be tormented and accused. He looked at the undeniable videotaped evidence of his wife's deep and calculated betrayal, and something inside him finally, irrevocably, broke. He turned to Ava, his face a mask of cold fury I had never seen before. He raised a trembling hand, not to strike her, but to point with a final, unshakable authority toward the front door. "My mother is right," he said, his voice hard as iron. "Get out." When the front door clicked shut behind Ava, the house seemed to exhale, releasing a tension that had been building for years. But the space she left behind was not filled with peace. It was a cavernous void, a vast and silent distance that now stretched between my son and me. The sounds of the Sunday evening of October 12th, 2025, a distant siren, the rustle of leaves outside, were amplified in the sudden, heavy quiet. Leo didn't move for a long moment. He stood staring at the door she had just walked through, his shoulders slumped in a way that spoke of a collapse far deeper than mere posture. He was a man whose entire world, built on a foundation of lies he had chosen to ignore, had just been demolished. Then, with a sound that was half groan, half sob, he stumbled to the sofa and fell into it, burying his face in his hands. His body shook with the silent, racking grief of a man confronting his own shame. I did not go to him. The mother in me, the one who had spent a lifetime kissing scraped knees and soothing broken hearts, screamed to rush to his side, to wrap my arms around him and tell him it would be all right. But the woman I had become in the last few days, the woman who had been forced to fight for her own sanity, held me back. I stood by the fireplace, my fingers tracing the cool marble of the mantel, and I let him break. This was his reckoning, not mine. He had to sit in the rubble of the choices he had made, or rather, the choices he had failed to make. The silence he had offered me when I was being accused was the same silence I now offered him in his despair. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The only sound was his ragged breathing. Finally it came. A muffled, broken voice from behind his hands. "Mom." He looked up, his face streaked with tears, his eyes red and raw with a pain that was entirely of his own making. "I'm so sorry. I was so weak." The admission, raw and unvarnished, was the first honest thing he had said in months. I walked over and sat beside him on the sofa, leaving a careful space between us. I did not touch him. I simply looked at him, the mother and the judge, the heart and the steel, all at once. "Weakness is a choice, Leo," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "You chose to be weak when you let her disrespect me. You chose to be weak when you stayed silent while I was being accused in my own home. But strength," I added, my gaze never wavering, is also a choice. From now on, I expect you to choose correctly. I saw the truth of my words land, a painful but necessary blow. He nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. I knew the road ahead for us, for him, would be long and difficult. The trust that had been so casually discarded could not be so easily reclaimed. But as I sat there beside my broken son, for the first time in a very long time, I saw a flicker of hope. 6 months later, on a bright April morning in 2026, I sat in my garden, the gentle scent of lavender drifting on the breeze, and realized that the silence in my home now held a completely different meaning. The quiet was no longer a void left by betrayal, but a canvas for the gentle sounds of my new life, the chirping of sparrows in the bird bath Robert had built, the distant hum of a lawnmower, the soft rustle of my own movements in the flower beds. It was the sound of peace. The first thing I did after that night was change the locks, not out of fear, but as a quiet declaration of sovereignty. My home was mine again, a fortress of tranquility, and the key was no longer a token to be casually handed out, but a privilege to be earned. I was living freely, no longer walking on the eggshells of another person's manipulations. Leo was changing too. He was in therapy, he'd told me, his voice quiet but steady, working to untangle the knots of weakness and guilt that had allowed Ava's poison to take root. His weekly visits were different now. He didn't come out of obligation, a son dutifully checking a box. He came because he wanted to. We'd sit here in the garden and talk, really talk, for the first time in years, rebuilding our relationship not on the fractured ground of the past, but on a new foundation of difficult, honest respect. Last week, a letter arrived. The return address was a P.O. box I didn't recognize, but I knew the elegant, sloping handwriting instantly. It was from Ava. I held the thin envelope, feeling no anger, no curiosity, only a distant, quiet finality. I didn't open it. I walked to the small paper shredder in my study, a new purchase I was particularly fond of, and fed the letter to its mechanical teeth. I watched the strips of paper fall like meaningless confetti into the bin below, severing the last withered cord that connected me to her. Whatever pleas for money or forgiveness it contained, they were not my concern anymore. Leo arrived this morning, not with the haunted look he'd worn for months, but with a quiet, genuine smile that reached his eyes. He handed me a small, neatly wrapped box. "For the house," he said simply. I unwrapped it to find a new, modern doorbell camera. I looked at him, a question in my eyes. "Leo, the other system." He shook his head, a sad, knowing look on his face. "That one was for a different reason, Mom." He installed it for me right then, his hands surprisingly deft. As he connected the final wire, he stepped back, not looking at the device but at me. His gaze was steady and clear, filled with a new, hard-won strength I had not seen in him since he was a young man. "This time," he said, his voice full of meaning, "it's so you can see who deserves to walk through your door." Tears pricked my eyes, but these were not tears of pain or anger. They were tears of relief, of a mother's profound pride. I smiled, a true, deep smile that reached my eyes and warmed my soul. I had reclaimed my home. I had reclaimed my dignity. And most importantly, slowly but surely, I was getting my son back. The small, dark lens of the new doorbell camera is more than just a piece of technology now. It's a quiet symbol of a boundary I finally learned to draw. I finally understood that protecting my peace isn't selfish. It is the ultimate act of self-respect. True family doesn't demand a price for entry. It earns it through trust and love. Now, the only sounds that fill my mornings are the birds chirping in my garden, a daily reward for the dignity I fought to reclaim. I would love to hear your story. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect your own peace?